Well, I'm so excited to be joined today with Tiffany Lin, life coach. And how would you describe yourself? I'll pass it on to you to do a little self introduction.
Yeah, for sure. I am Tiffany. I call myself an inner work and life coach. And I am here because I want to create a world where more and more people can live their lives, operate from their heart, their truest desire. Because I truly believe that if more people here do this, this world will become a better place. So it starts from here, from me doing that and me empowering others to do that as well.
Can you share like a little short snippet of how you became a coach? Because I think a lot of people don't know, and you don't really say it on your Instagram, but you actually you were a real estate investor. So what made you
Yes.
decide to make that transition to become a coach?
Yeah, so I was, so like you said, I was doing real estate investing for like a few years, and before that, I was doing 9 to 5. But it's almost just like I went into this, and I'm like, okay, this is not really fulfilling my heart. Like there's something that's empty here. And that feeling of discomfort had just become too big to not to ignore. And same thing with me transitioning to being a life coach is last year when pandemic hit and then you got stuck at home and you ended up spending so much time with yourself. I'm sure a lot of us felt this way. And I've always felt like doing real estate investing, it was fun and interesting, but it just doesn't fulfill my heart, like and it gets me the money, it gets me the bank account, but I just like ask myself, like, is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life, and not feeling like my heart is fulfilled. And I think throughout pandemic, the beginning, it was just becoming too big, like the feeling is just too painful not to ignore. So what happened was I ended up actually found this recent investor. He is doing what I was doing, like he was doing what I was doing at the time, but he has been a coach for 8 years and he was doing the exact real estate strategy. And then just to be able to see someone who is where I wanted to be and who has been through what I was going through at the time just really gave me the courage to be like, you know what, if he can do it, I can do it too. And
Yes.
I'm going to just take that leap of faith. I'm going to figure out how to fly on the way down. So here I am a year later.
Amazing. I love those stories. I think for us too, like finding or starting the Holistic Panda was also,
Yeah.
it was a calling that like we couldn't ignore. And I think it's also, in life, it's all about timing. And for us, when we decided to do this last year, it was like COVID happened. And then, like, it became an undeniable that people really need to take care of their health, not just physical
Yeah.
health, but like mental health as well.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to talk to you about today's topic. It's a really, really big one,
Mhm.
especially for Asians out there, on how to
Yeah.
forgive our parents and break away, patternings that we had, might have picked up from them. Um, you know, I think in the Asian culture, I mean, I think in all culture, like,
Mhm.
obeying your parents is prevalent, but especially in Asian culture, the concept of like filial piety, like obeying your elders,
Yeah.
taking care of your parents, caring for them. It's so, so, so strong. And even if you're not, you know, a Taoist, or a Buddhist, like I think it's a value that across all ethnic groups in the Asian community, it's a really, really strong value, right? Especially since, a lot of your parents like would provide for you, like, so there's a sense of duty and responsibility to give back to your parents. And that what that means also, it's like, we might feel guilty or like ashamed when we defy them and do something
Mm.
that they might not want. Like for the easiest one would be, pursuing career
Oh yeah,
path that
for sure.
yeah, I heard that saying, if you're not a lawyer, you're not a doctor, then
Like
you're,
accountant or something.
then you're a
Yeah.
failure. Like I think, you know, for us, especially this generation, it's so hard to sort of reconcile that. Like, how do we be find alignment with who we are, yet without disappointing our
Mm.
parents? Or so how do you, like, what is your take on that?
Wow,
No,
that's so big.
your example, like you, I'm sure, um,
Yeah.
carving out this path is like this unconventional path, at least in Asian
Mm,
culture, wasn't not something that's like, like I don't know how many Asian life coaches that are out there.
yeah. Um, I feel like for myself and probably for other people who are listening to this, I think the first thing is really being self-aware of what exactly are we reconciling here, because there's so much, right? And I think like being self-aware is the best start to any reconciliation, any healing, any transformation. And then the second thing that I would say is I really love this concept by Simon Sinek. I think he published this book recently called The Infinite Game. And he doesn't really talk exactly like that, but this is how I took it. So I think that whether it is a quality or about our parents or the ancient wisdom of the filial piety, um, it's not that quality or that ancient wisdom or that culture, that religion that is good or bad. It's more like the meaning that we attach to it. And we each have personal meaning that we attach to it. But then when we attach the meaning as good and bad, then it becomes very finite. Then we become stuck into this. And
Right.
when we're stuck into this, then then this thing, this quality, then have influence and power over us.
Yeah.
But usually what I will tell my clients is when you see this as an infinite entity, when
Mhm.
you see a quality as nor good or bad, but
Yeah.
they could be both, it incorporates both, then how do you make this thing an empowering thing to you? How do you make it serving to you? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel like all these traditions and things, they are they're nor good or bad. It's just in a different era. Are this still serving the people? It's almost like that 9 to 5 culture.
Yeah.
It's a in the manufacturing
Yeah.
industry at the time it works and it's so serving,
Yeah.
but is this really serving it right now? And I think same thing with the quality that either we adapt by our parents or this ancient wisdom that we adapt. How can we reconcile? But like I always say, like, instead of seeing it as a block, see it as a stepping stone.
Mm.
How can you make that a self-serving one, an empowering one? And I'm sure everybody has a different story.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I really stress on, especially when it comes to working on my own inner work, but also my clients, is the moment we see things as like finite, good and bad,
Yeah.
we're meant to be stuck. We're
Yeah.
meant to be
For
stuck at one
sure.
point. There's literally no way out, right?
Yeah.
It becomes a boundaries to your problem. But then when you start seeing it as infinite, then there's so many more opportunities that you can
Mhm.
see that can actually empower you. So
I-
that's what I would say.
yeah.
And then I think one thing is also compassion. I always say that, like, I've also come a long way in terms of forgiving my own parents, right? And a lot of times I don't say that this journey is linear. It's not linear. Like I like to call it goes like this. Like I think any transformation, it goes like this. Like it goes to circle, but then it keeps going up, right? So sometimes you're gonna go back and feeling like, oh, I can't forgive my parents again, even though you're like, oh, I just forgive them like 2 years
Yeah.
ago. Like, why am I still
Literally.
feeling
Yeah.
like this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think compassion really helps. I always say that, like, if we had been through what they have been through, exactly how they have grown up in the same era, we will probably do the exact same thing. Um, so, and
True.
what we've learned in NLP is that people are not their behavior. That's one
Mm.
thing. Like we separate people from their
Oh, I
behavior.
love that. Oh, I love that. So powerful. But it's
Yeah.
easier said than done because you automatically associate that person with their actions. And,
Yeah.
like to your point, even if you do an act of selfishness, it doesn't mean that you're a selfish person just because the act might be
Yeah.
selfish.
That's a good point, because my next thing is then another thing we say in NLP is every behavior is motivated by a positive intent.
Okay,
And
I
as
like that.
hard as
Ooh,
it
I
is,
love that.
yeah, as hard as it is like hard to accept, because even the worst behavior we've seen in media, right? It all actually is motivated by a positive intent. It's either, a lot of it comes back to the need for love,
Yeah.
right? So then when we can detach our behaviors from people, then there's more compassion that can come in for our parents. One thing that I like to do with my clients, I like to make them role play.
Yeah.
So then I'll be like, okay, now you're gonna be your mom or you're gonna be your dad. And then we're literally, then it's coaching. Then I started coaching her as if she is her dad or she's her mom. And that puts her in a perspective where she fully then understands where her parents are
Oh,
coming
that's
from.
so interesting. That is so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think to your point, I mean, this is like, I mean, I think it's obvious, but it's also not obvious. I think being compassionate with your parents and try to empathize, but it's hard, right? Like, I mean, like my parents are immigrants and they have such a different life than I do. Like my dad,
Yeah.
grew up in a single house, with a single mom. Like his dad left him when he was really young. So for me,
Yeah.
it's harder to put myself in his shoes, but I try to. And I think, I mean, at 35, I think sometimes I still, that inner child, like, I don't think I've completely healed all that inner child wound because,
Mm.
he is not the most, I think a lot of people can relate to this. He's not the most affectionate person growing up. He didn't really get
Hmm.
any positive reinforcement. And I really think it's because of his childhood. Like his mother
Yeah.
who raised him was very critical, was very, a lot
Mm.
of affection. So he naturally picked that up from her. And I'm like, I want to learn to forgive him. And I also don't
Yeah.
want to become that parent to my children or even to my partner.
Mm.
Like I have had romantic partners who would tell me there were moments when you're really cold. And I don't know if I did something wrong, but you would just be
Mm.
distant or I would nitpick on what they're doing wrong. And
Mm.
I'm like, I don't want to be this person, yet it's almost like autopilot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Like,
I'm
it's
like,
funny.
yeah.
No, I actually just talked about something about fear of becoming like your parents like last week on my IG story.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people can relate. It's like, I don't want to be like them.
Yeah.
And what I'll say is this, and this is like purely my
Yes.
personal experience and my opinion. I think that sometimes, like, the only way out is through. And the reason why I say this is because the more you're resistant to what is, the more it becomes your shadow. So what your
Mm,
shadow self really is the parts of you that you deny and you disown about
right.
you.
Right.
So when it becomes your shadow, guess what's going to happen? Because it's behind you, you don't have control over it, and it's going to come out in times where you don't want it to come out.
Yeah.
It's going to come out maybe when you're drunk, it's come out when you're emotional, right?
So would you say the shadow self is like the side of ourselves that we're ashamed of and that comes out in moments? So in moments when we're acting not our best versions of ourselves, like for instance, when I like throw a temper tantrum, like even sometimes I'm like, why am I acting like this? It's very weird. Like I
Mm.
feel like it's like an inner child acting out. Is that the shadow self or is it different?
I like to define shadows more as just the parts of you that you deny and you disown. So like if you're slightly ashamed of it, maybe there's elements of you that you deny about it,
Gotcha.
right? But then the thing is, when we deny and we disown, then we're not really dealing with it. What I always say is, like, sometimes the more we want to get rid of it, the more it comes to you, right? It's like if someone knocks on the door so much, and if you don't answer, it's just going to become louder. But
Yeah.
maybe this person just want to come in and like have a seat there and not do anything. So it's like, what I like to say is, can you accept that to be a part of your chapter?
Mm,
Can you accept that to be a part of you and not be defined by it? Can
right.
you accept that to be a part of your chapter, and it doesn't have to be your book,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? It can be chapter 2, but then the story is still going to be very different from chapter
Right.
2.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
So just because there are aspects of ourselves that we might model our parents, it doesn't mean that we'll become like them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably, I think, well, like, yeah, go back to like what I think about this situation. The only way out is through is sometimes we need to become like them to change it. And that's like my personal story. It's because my personal experience is because we need to stop resisting what is. And if that is currently what has been our past conditioning, we have to almost like not give it any negative meaning to in order to see it as is, if that makes sense. And
Mm-hmm.
when we see it as is, then there are opportunities for you to build new neural pathway,
Yeah.
create a new identity of yourself, like be beyond your past conditioning.
Right.
But then whenever you resist it, it has this energy that you want to comes back.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good.
You can tell I'm really passionate about this.
No, I think this is such a big topic because I think,
Yeah.
a lot of, obviously, well, I think they say from like 0 to 7, that's when
Hmm.
when you really form your identity. And I
Hmm.
think, at least I talking to my peers, like a lot of Asian friends, and in our generation, I think, especially who grew up in Asia, like I was born in Hong Kong and lived there until I was 10. It's just like, you know, parents are very stern, don't
Mm.
really show affection almost. I think in turn it made all of us, perfectionists, or striving to be perfectionists, because we want to be validated by our parents. I think, like, to your point,
Yeah.
everything that we do, the underlying motivation is we want to be loved and accepted,
Yeah,
right? And I think,
absolutely.
um so, like, for me, my example, when I definitely did grow up being very hardworking, very ambitious, and I mean, also kind of why it led me to start this just holistic panda.
Yeah.
But it's also, at the same time, it's exhausting to always want to strive and to need to be perfect. And I
Mm.
don't, and it's to a point where I'm like, I don't want to live like this, right? And I think it's, how do I reprogram that? How do I reprogram that?
Mm.
So how do I live in freedom and live in alignment with who I really am, and just learning to have fun and enjoy life, which is also
Yeah.
a very difficult concept to grasp, because I feel like, I mean, I think it's all pervasive against in all cultures, but especially Asians. You're like, you need to work
Mm.
hard to get what you want. If you don't work,
Mm.
then you won't get what you want. And I think,
Mm.
yeah, so,
Yeah, I think, well, if you don't mind, I think my question for you is what would have to happen for you to then start living in true alignment with yourself?
ooh, I think the first thing that pops up is to not be so hard on myself.
Hmm.
That's the first thing that pops up. And I think
Yeah.
I go on autopilot and I act because I don't want to disappoint other people. And
Mm.
whether it's my teammates, whether it's my family, my friends, I don't want to disappoint. And I think it comes back to growing up, I don't want to disappoint my parents, hence everything I do,
Mm.
so I don't disappoint them. But in
Hmm.
reality, I think they will be happy as long as I'm like healthy, I'm thriving. And I think it's
Yeah.
I interpret it, because I'm like, I need to be this perfect person in order for my parents to love me. No,
Mm,
it's all
yeah, and I think a lot of us, especially Asians, go through this. It's because we like, and I'm generalizing here, but a lot of Asian parents kind of grow up because they kind of come to you in a way because they treat us as an extension of themselves. So
yeah,
if they think they're not enough, the way that they talk to us is as if we are also not enough. And then we grow up thinking that we're not enough and we have to be perfect, right? But then how do we let that stop? This is like literally like generational trauma, right? Like how
yeah,
do we stop in
yeah,
our generation so
yeah.
that it doesn't go forward? And that takes a lot of work. I think one thing that I think, again, another generalization that our cultures don't like foster is um, take your worth as your responsibility and build that worth that you have with yourself for yourself, right? Like we're so used to like needing other people's validation. Like we're so used to our parents' validation, or like desperately needing our parents' validation, that we stop looking at the end of the day, are we disappointing ourselves? Like, are we validating ourselves? You know, and I think like that is what I've learned from, because I spent half of my life in Taiwan, and then I spent the second half of my life in Canada. And I think that's like the biggest difference that I've learned is taking that responsibility of self-love and like worthiness, and and take full responsibility with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, also you brought up a really good point about the self. I think
Mhm.
I see a therapist, and a lot of the times she was like, I think one of the things that I struggled with is, feeling a lack of support from people around me. And she was like,
Mm,
why does it have to be, why can't you be the one supporting yourself? And then I'm like,
yeah.
it's almost like you're doubting your own capability. Like, if I, you
Mm,
know what I mean? And I was like, oh, I don't know why I don't think that my own support of myself is enough. It's almost like you
mhm.
believe in my own power. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's not your fault too. Like, it starts from being aware, and that's amazing, but it's also like it's not our fault that we are here today. You know, I always say that one thing that I've learned from like the last 2 weeks is anything that's not unconditional love is not ours. Like, we were born into this world
Yeah.
just like a love ball. Like, look at the infants. They're like the most heavenly thing ever, and squishy, and like they're not like, they don't just like born into this world and be like, I'm not enough.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, like, but yeah, but we've learned all of these things. So
Yeah.
like recognize that, like, okay, this is not mine, but I'm taking full responsibility of my life to change it. Um, yeah.
Well, I feel like we can talk all day about,
We really can.
we want to be cognizant of time. So I'm just looking,
Yeah, for sure.
um, so when you're coaching with your clients,
Mhm.
if when they're with their struggles with their parents, what are some of the most kind of common themes that come up, and how do you help them navigate that? Like, is it to find sort of uh, find alignment within themselves, and finding like pursuing path that their parents might not want them to be on, or is it sort of other areas that?
A lot. I think everything that we just talk about has kind of like touched on. Like, it's really common. Fear of disappointing parents, like needing to make parents proud, or there's communication gap between, you know,
Yeah.
us and parents, and expecting parents. A big thing is expecting parents to accept us for who we
Yeah,
are. I think
that's a
that's
big
a
one.
really big thing.
That's a
That's a
big
really
one.
big.
So how do you, I mean, what is the,
Yeah,
if there is one?
of course. I think like with regards to that subject itself, what I usually tell clients is at the end of the day, we crave unconditional love from our parents. And that means
Yes.
love with all condition.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what I do, doesn't matter who I
Yes.
am, you love me.
Yeah.
And first of all, like, as adults now, and knowing what we know, and then not knowing what we know, right? Is we have to be the parents that we never had. So
Mm,
that's like the inner child and the inner parent comes in, right? Um, and the second thing, what I always say is, and this is just my experience with myself, and I tell my clients is, when you don't accept them for not accepting you, you're also not accepting them for not accepting
that's
you.
oh my God, light bulb moment. Yeah.
Right? So it's like, can you, like, you're expecting them for unconditionally loving you, but are you unconditionally loving them for not accepting you where you are at? And one big thing is, I like to think that our parents can have expectations, and expectations ultimately are preferences. And I'm sure, of course, I know we all been through the guilt tripping, the shaming for not meeting their expectations. But at the end of the day, I think that I like to believe that they will always, always love us, even though they may not show it in a ways that we want them to show it. But they may not like us for our decisions, for, you know,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. And it's like disassociating sort of the person with the behavior, kind of like,
yeah,
just because your parent doesn't agree with your decision, they might not like it for you because they think that you deserve something better. but it doesn't mean
Mhm.
that they don't love you. It doesn't mean that they're not going to support you. It just means that
Yeah.
they might not like what you're doing. And so
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
definitely, I think that's such a good point. And to your point about it's a two-way street. I feel like I always
Mhm.
like think my parents can't accept me for who I am. Why can't they just, but then I'm
Yeah.
mother to ask, am I accepting them for who they are?
Yeah. And also, are you accepting you for who you are?
Right. Am I accepting myself for who?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And
Uh,
I think that's almost the battle, right? Because like sometimes it's like a lot of us, we seek to be accepted by our parents. So we mold ourselves into someone that we don't actually even like about ourselves. But then they then don't even accept us. And then
yeah.
now you're like, okay, so now what?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good
Mhm.
point. Well, I think that's a great note to end this conversation. I feel like this can be a multiple series where we can talk about. So
Absolutely.
I think this is such a big topic and heavy topic, but I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, you definitely gave me a lot of key takeaways that I hope other people can find useful as well. So,
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about this and I appreciate that you came to me for this. I really appreciate
yeah.
it.
And what is your IG handle again?
It's Tiff underscore unwritten, like the song
Oh my
Natasha
God,
Bedingfield unwritten. Yeah.
I love that song. The Hills, but it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's like the opening theme to The Hills. And when the Hills did a reboot, there's actually a remix version, which is also really good.
Yeah. That was my favorite song in my junior high school. Like this
Yeah.
handle literally is the same handle I have for like my oldest email
Oh,
address.
really? But it's such a
Yeah.
like, it's about like
Yeah.
your journey is like your story is still unwritten, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
perfect in life where really your journey, your story can change at any time. It's like
Yeah.
you are the author with a pen and it's up to you
Yeah.
how you want to rewrite your story. Or
Yeah. And this
yeah.
is literally what we talk about today. What a good ending. Yeah.
I feel like I think I live at home, so definitely I feel like, a lot of things come up since I've moved back home.
Mhm.
I feel like there are moments when I'm like the 16-year-old Diana, actually no, 15 because I left when I was 16, but for boarding school.
Mm.
But I feel like there's like this inner child that's rebelling against my parents and the adult like,
Mm.
why are you acting like this? So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We can definitely talk
yeah,
more about like even just the inner child and the inner parent.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I would love to have another chat with you another time, but thank you for doing this.
Of course. Thank you so much, Stein. I really appreciate it.